The morning mist hung low over the Mississippi River, curling like a ghost up over the water's glassy surface.
At Willow Bend, a quiet dock in a small Louisiana town, the air carried the familiar scent of mud and fish, mingling with the faint hum of cicadas. It was the kind of place where nothing much happened, where folks waved from their fishing boats and the rhythm of life felt as steady as the river's flow. But on this particular May morning, that peace was about to shatter in a way no one could have imagined. Old Man Charlie, a weathered ferryman with skin like tanned leather and eyes squinted from years under the sun, was dragging his net along the riverbank, clearing debris as he'd done for decades. His hands moved with the ease of routine, but today, something felt off. The net snagged on something heavy, heavier than the usual driftwood or tangled weeds. Grunting, he tugged harder, his boots sinking into the muddy shore. What emerged from the murky water wasn't a log or a clump of river grass, it was a suitcase. Not just any suitcase, but a faded green one, the kind you'd find at a thrift store, battered and cheap. What made Charlie's blood run cold wasn't its worn appearance, but the way it was bound. Thick steel chains, rusted and crusted with algae, were wrapped tightly around it, secured with heavy padlocks that looked like they'd been there for years. Worse still, the corners of the suitcase bore crude welds, the metal scorched and uneven, as if someone had gone to great lengths to seal it shut forever. It looked like a coffin, not a piece of luggage. Charlie's heart pounded as he stumbled back, his net slipping from his hands. This wasn't trash. This was something sinister. His shouts drew a small crowd, local fishermen, a couple of early morning joggers, all peering at the chained suitcase with a mix of curiosity and dread. Within minutes, the Willow Bend dock was cordoned off by the local sheriff's department. Deputy Sheriff Tom Bennett, a grizzled veteran with a face carved by years of hard cases, arrived on the scene. His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached the suitcase, his gut telling him this was no ordinary find.
The welts, the shanks, the sheer weight of it screamed intent.
Whoever did this didn't want whatever was inside to ever see the light of day. Get the bolt cutters and a welder's torch, Bennett barked, his voice steady but laced with unease. The crowd watched in tense silence as deputies worked to break through the suitcase's defenses. The screech of metal against metal echoed across the river, sparks flying as the torch cut through the welds. Each snap of a chain felt like a countdown to something awful.
Wen the final lock gave weh and the suitcase creaked open, a kollektive gasp rippet trug the air.
The stench hit first, rotten, overpowering, the kind that clings to your throat and makes your eyes water. Inside wasn't a stash of stolen goods or forgotten clothes. It was a body, or rather, parts of one. A woman's remains, dismembered and stuffed into the suitcase like discarded trash. The crowd recoiled, some turning away, others frozen in horror. Bennett clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay professional as he scanned the grim contents. The victim's face was unrecognizable, deliberately mutilated. Her fingerprints had been destroyed, burned or cut away. No ID, no phone, no personal items. Whoever did this had gone to extreme lengths to erase her identity. The case was a dead end from the start. No name, no leads, no way to know who this woman was or why she'd ended up in a suitcase at the bottom of the Mississippi. The sheriff's department was stumped, and the weight of failure pressed down on Bennett's shoulders. This wasn't just a murder, it was a challenge, a taunt from a killer who believed they'd outsmarted everyone. The thought of this woman becoming just another cold case, a Jane Doe in a file cabinet, gnawed at him.
Justice felt like a distant dream.
But then, during the autopsy, a faint glimmer of hope emerged.
Doctor
Emily Carter, a young forensic examiner with a knack for spotting what others missed, noticed something on the victim's remains. A small tattoo on her thigh, no bigger than a quarter, depicting a familiar cartoon character, Hello Kitty, with a red bow. It was faded but distinct, tucked away in a spot only someone close to her might have seen. Bennett raised an eyebrow when Carter pointed it out.
Hello Kitty?
Thousands of women could have that tattoo. It's too common to narrow down. Carter didn't flinch. She kept working, her gloved hands moving carefully over the remains. Then she found something else, something that made her pause. Embedded in the victim's chest were 2 silicone breast implants, perfectly intact despite the brutality inflicted on the body. Her eyes lit up with a mix of excitement and determination. "Sheriff, these implants are our key. They're not just cosmetically retraceable." Bennett leaned in, skeptical but intrigued. Carter explained that high-end implants like these weren't mass-produced trinkets. Each pair had a unique serial number, like a VIN on a car, etched into the silicone. Those numbers could reveal where the implants were made, who distributed them, and most importantly which clinic or hospital had performed the surgery. It was a long shot, but it was something. For the first time since the suitcase was pulled from the river, Bennett felt a spark of possibility. Could these 2 small Cloisa cartoon tattoo and a pair of implants really lead them to the truth? The autopsy room buzzed with quiet intensity as Carter carefully extracted the implants and recorded their serial numbers. The team sent an urgent request to the manufacturer, a major medical company based in California. Every minute felt like an eternity as they waited for a response. The serial numbers were their only lifeline, a fragile thread in a case that seemed designed to stay unsolved. If this lead didn't pan out, they'd be back to square one, with a nameless victim and a killer laughing in the shadows. When the manufacturer's reply finally came, it was like a crack of light in a storm. The implants had been part of a batch shipped to a high-end cosmetic surgery clinic in New Orleans, a place called Crescent Beauty. The team didn't waste a second. Deputies descended on the clinic, armed with a warrant and a mission. The clinic staff, polished and professional, were cooperative but visibly shaken as they handed over patient records. Hundreds of files were sifted through, each one a potential match. The team cross-referenced the implant serial numbers with patient data, narrowing the search to women who'd had the procedure in the last few years. Hours ticked by, the air thick with tension.
10. Breakdruck.
One file stood out: Sarah Mitchell, 26, a New Orleans resident who'd had breast augmentation 2 years earlier using the exact implants found in the victim. Her file noted a distinctive detailer Hello Kitty tattoo on her left thigh. Bennett and Carter exchanged a glance, their exhaustion giving way to a surge of adrenaline. They had a name.
Sarah Mitchell wasn't a Jane Doe anymore.
But who was Sarah Mitchell? And who had wanted her dead so badly that they'd gone to such horrific lengths to erase her existence? The Mississippi River kept flowing, indifferent to the tragedy it had revealed. For Bennett and his team, identifying Sarah was just the beginning. The real hunt for her killer was about to start. Sarah Mitchell's name gave the investigation a pulse, but it also opened a Pandora's box of questions. Who was this 26-year-old woman whose life had ended in a chained suitcase at the bottom of the Mississippi? And what had she done, or who had she crossed to deserve such a brutal fate? Deputy Sheriff Tom Bennett and Dr. Emily Carter knew that understanding Sarah's world was the key to finding her killer. They dove into her life, piecing together a portrait that was as complex as it was troubling. Sarah wasn't your average small-town girl. She lived in a sleek, high-rise apartment in downtown New Orleans, the kind of place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman who knew your name. Her Instagram was a curated gallery of glamour designer handbags, rooftop cocktails, sunsets from Caribbean vacations. She didn't have a steady 9-to-5 job, yet her lifestyle screamed money. Expensive clothes, a leased BMW, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. It didn't add up. Bennett's first thought was that someone was bankrolling her, and that someone might hold the answers. The team pulled Sarah's financial records and combed through her social media. Her posts painted a picture of a woman who loved the spotlight, always posing with a glass of champagne or a new pair of Louboutins. But there were hints of something darker beneath the gloss. Cryptic captions about haters and fake friends suggested not everyone in her orbit was a fan. Her phone records showed frequent calls and texts with 3 men, each a potential lead in the tangled web of her life. The first was Robert Bob Hargrove, a 55-year-old real estate mogul with a mansion in the Garden District and a wife of 30 years. Hargrove was a big name in New Orleans, a philanthropist who rubbed elbows with politicians and threw lavish galas. But behind the polished facade, he had a reputation for discretion and for keeping company with younger women. Sarah's bank account showed regular deposits from an account linked to one of Hargrove's shell companies. The arrangement was clear. Sarah was his mistress, a kept woman in exchange for a life of luxury. Hargrove's gifts, jewelry, trips to Paris, even her apartment lease were the price of her companionship. It was a transactional relationship, common in the city's elite circles, but one that could breed jealousy or betrayal. The second man was Ethan Parker, Sarah's on-again, off-again boyfriend. Ethan was 28, a struggling musician who played gigs in dive bars around the French Quarter. His Instagram was full of grainy photos of him strumming a guitar or nursing a beer, his eyes always carrying a hint of melancholy. He didn't have Hargrove's money or influence, but his texts to Sarah were raw and heartfelt.
"I'd give you the world if he could," Von Ried.
Ethan's love for Sarah seemed genuine, but it was strained by her lavish lifestyle he couldn't compete with. When deputies interviewed him, his hands trembled, and his voice cracked as he spoke of her. "She was everything to me, but I wasn't enough," he said, tears welling up. He claimed he'd been at a gig the night Sarah disappeared, a story backed by bar staff and timestamps on his social media. The third man was Jake Russo, a 30-something crypto trader Sarah had met online. Their connection was less clear, mostly late-night texts about Bitcoin investments and quick cash opportunities. Jake was flashy, always posting photos of sports cars and Rolexes, but his background was murky. He claimed to be a self-made entrepreneur, but public records showed a string of failed businesses and a minor fraud charge from years back. His texts to Sarah were casual, almost transactional, but there was an edge to them, like he was always pitching something. When questioned, Jake said he barely knew Sarah, just a friend of a friend he'd met through a networking group. He said he'd been in Miami for a crypto conference the day Sarah vanished, a claim supported by flight records and event photos. All 3 men had alibis that checked out, which frustrated Bennett to no end. Hargrove was in New York for a business deal, with plane tickets and hotel receipts to prove it. Ethan was strumming his guitar in front of a crowd. Jake was schmoozing at a conference 800 miles away. Each had a motive: jealousy, betrayal, greed, but none had the opportunity. Or so it seemed. Bennett couldn't shake the feeling that one of them was lying, or that someone else was lurking in Sarah's orbit, someone they hadn't yet uncovered. The team retraced Sarah's last known movements. On May 23, the day she disappeared, she'd had a photo shoot booked with a local fashion brand. Her texts showed she'd been excited about it, a chance to model for a campaign that could boost her influencer status. She'd left her apartment around 2 p.m., telling her neighbor she'd be back by evening. Her phone's GPS last pinged near a studio in the warehouse district, then went dark. The photographer confirmed Sarah had shown up, posed for a few shots, and left around 5 p.m. After that, she vanished. Bennett and Carter interviewed everyone connected to the shoot: photographer, stylist, assistants, but no one saw anything unusual. Sarah had been her usual bubbly self, chatting about her weekend plans. The only odd detail was a text she'd sent to Ethan just before leaving the studio, heading to meet someone.
Wish me luck.
Who was she meeting? Was it a spur-of-the-moment date, a business deal, or something more sinister? Ethan swore he didn't know, and the text's vagueness offered no clues.
The investigation hit a wall.
The alibis were airtight, the trail was cold, and the media was starting to circle, splashing Sarah's glamorous photos across the news with headlines like "Influencer's Grisly End." Public pressure mounted, and Bennett felt the heat from the sheriff's office to deliver answers. Every night, he pored over case files, replaying the details in his mind. The suitcase, the chains, the implants, the tattoo. There had to be something they'd missed. Then, a break came from an unexpected source. Carter had requested a deeper dive into Sarah's financials, focusing on transactions after her disappearance. Most of her accounts had gone quiet, but one stood out: her debit card. At 11:15 p.m. on May 23, hours after she was last seen, someone withdrew $200 from an ATM in a seedy part of the city. The transaction was small, almost unnoticeable, but it was a red flag. Sarah was presumed dead by Thenso, who was using her card. Bennett's team scrambled to pull the ATM's security footage. The grainy video showed a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He moved with a casual confidence, punching in the pin like he'd done it 100 times. For a split second, he glanced up, and the camera caught a clear shot of his face, a smug, almost defiant look. Bennett's heart raced. This wasn't Hargrove, Ethan, or Jake. This was someone new. Using facial recognition software, the team cross-referenced the image with criminal databases. Within hours, they had a match: Michael Mike Dorsey, a 42-year-old cab driver with a rap sheet for petty theft and assault. Dorsey had no known connection to Sarah, which made the discovery even more chilling. Was he a random predator who'd crossed paths with her that day? Or was there more to their encounter than met the eye? The ATM footage was a game-changer, but it raised as many questions as it answered. How had Dorsey gotten Sarah's debit card and PIN? Why was he bold enough to use it just hours after her death? And most importantly, where was he now? Bennett knew they had to move fast. Dorsey was their prime suspect, and every second he was free was a second he could slip away or strike again.
The Name Michael Dorsey litt a fire under the investigation.
For Deputy Sheriff Tom Bennett and Dr. Emily Carter, the grainy ATM footage was more than just a lead. It was proof that Sarah Mitchell's killer wasn't as clever as he thought. Dorsey, a 42-year-old cab driver with a history of petty crime, had made a fatal mistake by using Sarah's debit card. Now, the challenge was finding him before he could cover his tracks or disappear into the underbelly of New Orleans. Bennett assembled a task force, splitting the team into two groups. One dug into Dorsey's background, his habits, haunts, and history, while the other tracked his movements through the city's sprawling network of security cameras. Dorsey wasn't a master criminal. His rap sheet showed a string of small-time offenses, from shoplifting to bar fights. But something about this case felt different. The brutality of Sarah's murder, the calculated effort to erase her identity, suggested a level of ruthlessness that didn't align with his past. What had pushed him to this extreme? The team started with Dorsey's employer, a low-budget cab company called Bayou Rides. The dispatcher, a chain-smoking woman named Linda, described Dorsey as a loner who kept to himself. He'd show up, drive his shifts, and leave. Never chatted much, she said, flicking ash onto the pavement. His cab's GPS records showed he'd been working the evening Sarah disappeared, picking up fares near her apartment around the time she left the photo shoot. One fare stood out, a pickup at 5:30 p.m. from a coffee shop 2 blocks from the studio, dropped off in a desolate industrial area on the city's outskirts. The passenger's name wasn't log cash payment. No app, but the timing and location were too close to Sarah's last movements to be a coincidence. Bennett's team pulled camera footage from traffic lights and storefronts along Dorsey's route. It was painstaking work, sifting through hours of blurry video, but they hit pay dirt at a gas station near the drop-off point. The footage showed Dorsey's cab parked at a pump around 6 p.m. on May 23. He stepped out, lit a cigarette, and paced nervously, glancing over his shoulder like he was expecting trouble. A few minutes later, a figure emerged from the back seat, a woman, petite, with long dark hair and a bright yellow dress that matched the outfit Sarah was last seen wearing. The video was too grainy to confirm her identity, but Bennett's gut told him it was her. The industrial area where Dorsey had dropped her was a maze of abandoned warehouses and rusted shipping containers, the kind of place where screams wouldn't carry far. It was a perfect spot for a crime, isolated yet close enough to the city to avoid suspicion. Bennett sent a forensic team to scour the area, but days of rain had washed away any obvious evidence.
No Blut, no Tiere Drecks, no Sins auf Arschdruckle.
If Sarah had been killed there, Dorsey had been meticulous about cleaning up. Meanwhile, the team tracking Dorsey's current whereabouts got a hit. His cab's GPS showed it parked at a rundown motel on the edge of town, a place known for hourly rates and no questions asked. Bennett didn't wait for a warrant. He led a convoy of patrol cars to the motel, their sirens silent to avoid tipping Dorsey off. The neon sign flickered as they pulled into the lot, casting an eerie glow over the peeling paint and cracked asphalt. Dorsey's cab was there, parked crookedly near room 12. The takedown was swift. Deputies surrounded the room, weapons drawn, as Bennett pounded on the door. "Michael Dorsey, this is the sheriff's department. Open up."
Silence.
Then a shuffle inside, followed by the creak of a window. "He's running," Carter shouted. Deputies kicked in the door just as Dorsey tried to climb out the bathroom window. He didn't get far. 2 officers tackled him to the ground, cuffing his wrists as he cursed and thrashed. In the interrogation room, Dorsey was a study in defiance. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, his face was all sharp angles and stubble, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. "I don't know nothing about no girl," he spat, leaning back in his chair.
"You got the wrong guy."
Bennett slid a still from the ATM footage across the table, showing Dorsey's face as he withdrew Sarah's money. "This says otherwise, Mike. Care to explain why you're using a dead woman's debit card?" Dorsey's bravado faltered, but he doubled down. "Found the card on the street. Thought I'd get lucky. That's it." His story was flimsy, and Bennett wasn't buying it. They had more than just the ATM footage. A search of Dorsey's cab had turned up a blood-stained rag in the trunk, and preliminary tests matched the blood type to Sarah's. Fibers from the suitcase's lining were found on his work gloves, tucked under the driver's seat. The noose was tightening, but Dorsey wasn't ready to break. Carter took a different approach, leaning on forensic evidence to rattle him. "We found tools in your apartment, Mike. A hacksaw, bolt cutters, a welding torch. Same kind used to seal that suitcase."
"And the chemicals you used to clean up?"
"We've got traces of them on your floorboards." Dorsey's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. For the first time, he looked scared. After hours of stonewalling, the weight of the evidence cracked him. His shoulders slumped, and he let out a long, shuddering breath. "All right," he muttered.
"I'll talk."
What followed was a confession so chilling it left the room silent. Dorsey's voice was flat, almost mechanical, as he recounted the events of May 23rd. He'd picked Sarah up near the coffee shop, just another fare. She was chatty, scrolling through her phone, bragging about a big cash transfer from some rich guy. She flashed her designer purse, her gold bracelets, her carefree smile. To Dorsey, it was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Greed took over. Dorsey saw an opportunity not just for a quick score, but for something bigger. He changed the route, driving to the industrial area under the pretense of a shortcut. Sarah didn't notice until it was too late. When she questioned him, he pulled a knife from the glove compartment, pressing it to her throat. "Don't scream," he growled. She froze, her eyes wide with terror. He forced her to hand over her purse, her jewelry, her phone. But it wasn't enough. In a moment of twisted impulse, he attacked her, silencing her screams in the back of his cab.
Dorsey's Konfession Gredaka.
After killing her, he drove to his apartment, a cramped one-bedroom in a forgotten corner of the city. There, in the dead of night, he dismembered her body with a hacksaw, working methodically to erase her identity. He burned her face and fingertips with acid, ensuring no one could recognize her. The suitcase, an old relic from his closet, became her tomb. He chained it, welded it, and drove to Willow Bend under cover of darkness, heaving it into the river. He thought he'd covered every angle, that the Mississippi would keep his secret. But Dorsey hadn't counted on the implants or the ATM cameras. His arrogance using Sarah's card, staring into the lens, had been his downfall. As he finished his confession, Bennett felt a mix of relief and rage. They had their killer, but the cost was a young woman's life, snuffed out for nothing more than greed. The case wasn't over yet. Dorsey's confession needed corroboration, and the team had to ensure every piece of evidence would hold up in court. But for now, Sarah Mitchell's killer was behind bars, and the river that had hidden her for so long had finally given up its truth. With Michael Dorsey's confession on record, the case against him seemed ironclad, but Deputy Sheriff Tom Bennett knew better than to rest easy. Confessions could be challenged, evidence could be disputed, and a slick defense attorney could poke holes in even the tightest case. To ensure justice for Sarah Mitchell, Bennett, and Dr. Emily Carter had to build an airtight prosecution, one that would leave no room for doubt in a courtroom. The stakes were high not just for Sarah, but for every victim whose story deserved to be told. The team doubled down on physical evidence. Dorsey's apartment was a treasure trove of incriminating items. The hacksaw, caked with traces of blood and tissue, was sent for DNA analysis, which confirmed a match to Sarah. The welding torch, still smelling of scorched metal, bore residue consistent with the suitcase's welds. In a locked toolbox, deputies found a bottle of industrial-grade acid, the same kind used to destroy Sarah's face and fingerprints. Even the chains and padlocks were traced back to a hardware store where Dorsey had been a regular customer, with receipts linking him to the purchase. Digital evidence painted an equally damning picture. Dorsey's phone records showed he'd turned off his GPS during the hours Sarah disappeared, a deliberate move to avoid tracking. But he wasn't as clever as he thought. Metadata from Sarah's phone, recovered from a dumpster near his apartment, showed it had been active until 7 p.m. On May 23, when it sent a text to Ethan Parker, "Need some space.
I'll call you later."
The message was out of character for Sarah, who usually sent long, chatty texts. Carter suspected Dorsey had sent it to buy time, delaying any missing person report. Linguistic analysis confirmed the text's syntax didn't match Sarah's usual style, further implicating Dorsey. The ATM withdrawals were another nail in his coffin. After the initial $200, Dorsey had made 3 more withdrawals over the next 2 days, each at a different machine across New Orleans. He'd been careful to keep the amounts small, thinking it would fly under the radar. But bank records showed the exact times and locations, and security footage captured his face at 2 of the ATMs. His smug glance at the camera, once a taunt, was now a self-inflicted wound. Bennett's team also revisited the industrial area where Dorsey had taken Sarah. A second sweep, aided by cadaver dogs, uncovered a small patch of disturbed soil behind a warehouse. Buried shallowly were scraps of fabric matching Sarah's yellow dress, stained with blood. The discovery was grim but crucial, tying Dorsey to the crime scene. Soil samples from his cab's tires matched the area's unique clay composition, further linking him to the location. As the evidence piled up, Dorsey's defense began to crumble. His lawyer, a public defender named Carla Hayes, tried to argue that the confession was coerced and the evidence circumstantial. She claimed Dorsey had found Sarah's body and panicked, disposing of it to avoid trouble. But the argument fell apart under the weight of forensic proof. The blood in his cab, the tools in his apartment, The ATM footage was too much to dismiss. Hayes pushed for a plea deal, but the district attorney, fueled by public outrage over Sarah's murder, demanded a full trial. The trial began 6 months later, in a packed New Orleans courtroom. Sarah's story had gripped the city, her glamorous Instagram photos juxtaposed against the horror of her death. Reporters filled the gallery, and true crime podcasters dissected every detail. Bennett and Carter were key witnesses, walking the jury through the investigation step by step. Carter's testimony about the silicone implants was a turning point, her calm expertise cutting through the defense's attempts to muddy the waters. These implants weren't just medical devices, she told the jury. They were Sarah's voice, telling us who she was when everything else had been taken from her. Dorsey took the stand in his own defense, a risky move. Under cross-examination, his story unraveled. He claimed he'd picked Sarah up, dropped her off alive, and later found her purse in his cab. But when pressed on the blood, the tools and the ATM withdrawals, he stammered, his lies collapsing in real time. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. Dorsey was sentenced to life without parole, a small measure of justice for a life cut short. But the trial's end didn't erase the questions that lingered. Why had Sarah been so trusting, climbing into a stranger's cab without a second thought? What drove Dorsey to escalate from petty theft to cold-blooded murder? And could anything have prevented this tragedy? Bennett and Carter grappled with these thoughts as they left the courthouse, the weight of the case still heavy on their shoulders. Sarah's life, laid bare in court, revealed a woman caught between ambition and vulnerability. Her relationship with Robert Hargrove, the wealthy benefactor, had given her access to a world she dreamed of but also exposed her to risks she couldn't foresee. Her love for Ethan Parker, though genuine, couldn't anchor her in a life she'd outgrown. And her casual chats with Jake Russo, the crypto hustler, showed how easily she trusted those who crossed her path. Sarah's choices weren't uncommon in a city like New Orleans, where glamour and grit coexist, but they'd left her vulnerable to a predator like Dorsey. The media frenzy didn't stop with the verdict. Documentaries and articles explored Sarah's life, some painting her as a victim of her own ambition, others as a cautionary tale about the dangers of modern dating. Her Instagram, now a digital memorial, drew thousands of comments, some mourning her, others judging her. Bennett found it hard to read the coverage, knowing it reduced Sarah to a headline when she'd been so much more. For the team, the case was a reminder of the fragility of life and the persistence of justice. The Mississippi River, which had nearly kept Sarah's secret, had ultimately betrayed Dorsey's crime. The implants, the tattoo, the ATM footage, small details had unraveled a seemingly perfect murder. As Bennett drove home after the trial, the river glinted under the moonlight, a quiet witness to the truth they'd fought to uncover. The conviction of Michael Dorsey brought closure to Sarah Mitchell's case, but for Deputy Sheriff Tom Bennett and Dr. Emily Carter, the victory was bittersweet. They'd caught a killer, but the cost was a young woman's life, stolen in a moment of senseless greed. As the media spotlight faded and New Orleans moved on, the team reflected on the lessons of the case, lessons about trust, vulnerability, and the thin line between safety and danger in a world that often glitters with false promises. Sarah's story wasn't just a crime statistic, it was a window into the pressures facing young women in a society obsessed with image and instant success. Her Instagram, with its endless stream of curated perfection, told only half the truth. Behind the designer dresses and tropical vacations was a life built on precarious choices. Her arrangement with Robert Hargrove, the wealthy real estate tycoon, was a shortcut to the lifestyle she craved: a penthouse, luxury cars, VIP tables at exclusive clubs. But it came with strings, tying her to a man whose generosity masked control. Hargrove wasn't a killer, but his world of power and privilege had drawn Sarah into an orbit where appearances trumped safety. Ethan Parker, her boyfriend, represented a different kind of love, one that was real but powerless against her ambitions. His tearful testimony at the trial had humanized Sarah, showing a side of her that wasn't chasing status. He'd begged her to leave Hargrove, to build a simpler life with him, but Sarah couldn't let go of the glamour. Ethan's grief was palpable, a reminder that love, no matter how pure, can't always save someone from their own desires. Jake Russo, the crypto trader, was a wild card. His connection to Sarah was fleeting, but it highlighted her openness to new faces, new opportunities. She'd met him through a DM, charmed by his flashy persona and promises of easy money. Russo wasn't involved in her death, but his presence in her life underscored how easily she trusted strangers, a trait that Michael Dorsey had exploited. Dorsey's transformation from small-time crook to murderer was harder to unravel. His confession revealed a man consumed by envy and opportunism. Sarah's casual boasting in his cab about her money, her trips, her sugar daddy had ignited something in him. To Dorsey, she wasn't a person. She was a symbol of everything he'd never have. His decision to kill wasn't planned but born of a split-second impulse, fueled by years of resentment. The meticulous cover-up, dismembering her body, welding the suitcase, dumping it in the river, was his attempt to erase not just Sarah but his own failure. Yet his arrogance, flashing her debit card at ATMs, proved he wasn't as smart as he thought. The case also showcased the power of modern forensics. The silicone implants, a detail most would overlook, became Sarah's silent testimony. Their serial numbers, etched in microscopic precision, led straight to her identity, proving that even the smallest clue can crack a case. The ATM footage, the blood in Dorsey's cab, the fibers on his glovesole were threads in a tapestry of guilt that no defense could unravel. For Carter, the forensic work was a reminder that science could give voice to the voiceless, even when a killer tried to silence them forever. Bennett, meanwhile, wrestled with the broader implications. Sarah's death wasn't just a random act, it was a consequence of a culture that glorifies wealth and visibility. Social media had amplified her life, making her a target for envy and predation. Her posts, meant to inspire, had instead drawn the wrong kind of attention. Bennett wondered how many others were out there, chasing the same dream, unaware of the risks lurking in plain sight.
The community response was mixed.
Some saw Sarah as a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers of living beyond one's means. Others mourned her as a victim of circumstance, a young woman who'd wanted more and paid the ultimate price. Local churches held vigils, and a scholarship fund was set up in her name, aimed at helping young women pursue education over fleeting fame. The Mississippi River, once a backdrop to tragedy, became a symbol of resilience, its currents carrying away the pain of the past. For the sheriff's department, the case was a testament to persistence. They'd faced a faceless victim, a taunting killer, and a trail that seemed to vanish into the river. Yet they'd prevailed, not through luck but through dogged determination. Bennett took pride in that, even as he grieved for Sarah. He visited her grave once, a simple headstone in a New Orleans cemetery, and left a single flower. "We got him," he whispered, hoping somehow she could hear. Carter, too, found meaning in the outcome. As a scientist, she believed in facts, but this case had taught her about the human side of justice. Sarah wasn't just a body on her table, she was a daughter, a friend, a dreamer. Carter began volunteering at a local women's shelter, sharing her expertise to help others avoid Sarah's fate. She spoke at schools, warning students about the dangers of oversharing online and trusting too easily. Her message was simple: your worth isn't in what you own or how you look, it's in who you are. As the first anniversary of Sarah's death approached, the case remained a touchstone for New Orleans. The city's nightlife still pulsed, its streets still hummed with ambition and excess, but Sarah's story lingered like a shadow. For those who knew her, and for the strangers who followed her case, it was a reminder to tread carefully in a world where beauty and danger often walk hand in hand. A year after Michael Dorsey's conviction, the ripples of Sarah Mitchell's murder still echoed through New Orleans. The city had moved on new scandals, new headlines, but for those touched by the case, the lessons endured. Deputy Sheriff Tom Bennett and Dr. Emily Carter carried the weight of Sarah's story, not as a burden but as a call to action. Her death had exposed truths about ambition, trust, and the hidden costs of a life lived for appearances. It was a tragedy, but also a chance to change how people thought about safety and self-worth. Sarah's life, dissected in court and splashed across the media, was a mirror to modern America. She'd grown up in a modest suburb, the daughter of a teacher and a mechanic, dreaming of a bigger life. Social media offered a glimpse of that life: models, influencers, celebrities flaunting wealth and freedom. Sarah wanted to be part of that world, not just to have it but to be seen having it. Her arrangement with Robert Hargrove, the real estate mogul, was her ticket in. He provided the trappings of success: designer clothes, exotic trips, a glamorous address, but at a cost. She traded autonomy for security, a choice that left her vulnerable to those who saw her as a means to an end. Ethan Parker, her boyfriend, was the oppositea reminder of the life she might have had. His love was unconditional, but it couldn't compete with the allure of Hargrove's world. Ethan's music, his dreams, were grounded in authenticity, not flash. After the trial, he left New Orleans, unable to bear the memories. He released a song titled Yellow Dress, a haunting ballad about loss that climbed local charts. It was his way of honoring Sarah, keeping her memory alive without the tabloid glare. Jake Russo, the crypto trader, faded from the narrative. He wasn't implicated, but his fleeting role in Sarah's life highlighted the dangers of online connections. Social media had made it easy for Sarah to meet people like Russo, whose slick promises masked shaky intentions. Her openness, her willingness to engage, was both her charm and her Achilles heel. It was a trait Michael Dorsey had exploited with devastating precision. Dorsey's downfall was a masterclass in justice prevailing. His plan: kill, dismember, disappear had seemed foolproof. He'd erased Sarah's face, her fingerprints, her identity, and sunk her remains in the Mississippi, believing the river would keep his secret. But he underestimated the power of small things. The silicone implants, with their tiny serial numbers, were a digital fingerprint he couldn't erase. The ATM cameras, capturing his fleeting arrogance, were his own betrayal. And the forensic team, led by Carter's meticulous eye, turned his perfect crime into a textbook case of failure. The case reshaped how New Orleans thought about safety. Community leaders launched campaigns urging young people to protect their personal information, both online and off. "Don't flash your cash" became a local mantra, a nod to Sarah's fatal mistake of boasting in Dorsey's cab. Schools added digital literacy to their curricula, teaching students to guard their privacy in a world where every post could be a beacon to predators. The sheriff's department, bolstered by the case's success, invested in advanced forensic training, ensuring they'd be ready for the next challenge. Bennett and Carter became local heroes, though neither sought the spotlight. Bennett, nearing retirement, took on a mentorship role, training young deputies to trust their instincts and never give up. He often spoke of Sarah, not as a victim but as a catalyst for change. "She showed us what matters," he'd say, "and what we're fighting for." Carter, meanwhile, expanded her advocacy, partnering with nonprofits to support at-risk women. She saw Sarah in every client she helped: bright, ambitious, but teetering on the edge of danger. The Mississippi River, once a silent accomplice, became a symbol of redemption. Locals began calling Willow Bend Sarah's Dock, a place where the truth had surfaced against all odds. On the anniversary of her death, a small memorial was held there.
Friends, family, and strangers gathered, tossing flowers into the water and sharing stories of Sarah's infectious luck and boundless dreams.
Ethan played Yellow Dress on his guitar, his voice breaking but strong. It was a moment of healing, a reminder that Sarah's life, not just her death, mattered. The broader impact was harder to measure. Sarah's story sparked debates about social media, materialism, and the pressures on young women to keep up. Some argued she'd been reckless, inviting danger with her flashy lifestyle. Others saw her as a victim of a society that equates worth with wealth.
The truth is always lay in the grey.
Sarah wasn't perfect, but she didn't deserve to die. Her choices reflected a world where likes and followers can feel like currency, and where the line between admiration and envy is razor-thin. For those who worked the case, the takeaway was clear: justice is relentless. Dorsey's crime, so carefully planned, was undone by details he never considered. The implants, the tattoo, the ATM footage, they were reminders that no one is invisible, and no crime is unsolvable. The system, flawed as it is, had worked. Science, grit, and a refusal to let Sarah fade into obscurity had won. As New Orleans looked to the future, Sarah's legacy lived on. Her story wasn't just a warning, but a call to build a world where no one has to trade safety for success. The river kept flowing, steady and unyielding, carrying her memory forward. And for Bennett Carter, and everyone who'd fought for her, that was enough.